Welcome everyone to this month's Tableau user group call. We have the topic of new features, Kent's annual talk. So we'll hear this once a year, every year for the rest of eternity, so long as Kent is capable.
Great.
And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll talk about some of the announcements that we have. You know what? I should have, Matthew, I'm sorry. I should have gotten you onto this slide, but you have 2 slides after this. So the plan for today is for me to talk through this slide, and then shortly after, we're going to follow up with Matthew Welborn, who is one of our new Tableau user group leaders. We brought Matthew in months ago, but I never made a formal announcement about it. So we're going to take that time today. And then after that, Kent will get on his annual soapbox and fill us in on everything that we may have missed or enjoy about the newer features that have come to Tableau. He was giving me a walkthrough earlier this week and actually got me pretty excited about a feature that I didn't know existed that I should have been using for months now. And we'll talk more about that later. And then at the end, we'll have open Q&A session. As usual, things to think about would be our virtual events calendar, where you are more than welcome to take part in any virtual event. I actually just attended the user group from Phoenix a couple weeks ago, which is kind of cool. They are similarly sized to ourselves and have their own content schedule that is quite different than ours. So if you're looking to attend more events in a similar group, I would say they're actually pretty comparable. I do have open office hours to anyone in the group. So if you guys are looking for help or have questions about how Tableau works, Matt has been taking full advantage of this lately. Him and I have been hanging out quite a bit, and we're best friends now. So that, not to say that that's the expectation of any of you that reach out to me. I won't try to be your best friend, but if you want to be, that's fine. And of course, I always want to know what you guys are thinking about, what you want to know more about. So if you have an interesting topic or something that you want me to do a deep dive on, or Kent or Kristen or Matt, we're more than happy to help out with that. Dates to look forward to is September 29th. Next month, we're going to have a new event, and we'll learn more about that later. And October 20th, we're going to talk about common problems in Tableau. So all those little things that we run into that just drive us insane, and the best solution that we've come up with to date. And with that, I'll hand it over to our friend Matthew Welborn.
Thanks, Sean. My name is Matthew Welborn, and I just started a couple months ago with the Tableau user group and leadership. I think Sean made a good point about other virtual user groups. There is a Tableau prep one that I joined recently, and then there's also a healthcare one. So like that's a good example of there's different industries that you can join and be a part of. And some of those are like pretty massive and can be pretty insightful to see what's going on. So fun fact is, lived in Richmond, Virginia for a decade. Really missed it out there, missed the trees, but here in Oklahoma is okay, minus the lack of trees. My educational background, went to OBU, studied anthropology and mathematics, so pretty disparate, but I enjoyed both of them. Now, after that, a couple of years later, I went to the University of Oklahoma, got my MBA, did a specialization in data analytics, which is what kind of led me to the current role I have now at OU Health. Career, I tried teaching, taught second grade for a bit, and then also worked at an IT help desk, kind of got me into the IT world a little bit. But then during my MBA, really found a lot of interest in data analytics, and I'm a big Tableau fan. I just remember the first time using it, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So it's nice to find something like that. The next slide has some fun pictures. So I like reading. I got The Road and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You can, those are 2 of my favorite books, and I went to see the Lion King on the OKC Broadway. I actually, as a result, ended up buying season tickets to OKC Broadway, so I don't know. I'm kind of a sucker for that kind of stuff. Let's see. I play D&D, been playing that for a couple years. Yeah, it does make me cry. It's so good. And then here's some other fun pictures. Those are my roommates currently, William and Scott. And then I also have the AMC A-list, so I see a lot of movies in the theaters. And then that's just me playing volleyball one day. I just thought it was a funny picture.
Cool. That,
All right. Hey, thanks,
more?
Matt, for the intro.
Yeah.
I feel like I know you better now.
Sounds great.
I know, I learned so much stuff now. We've been working together for over a year, and I'm like, I didn't know some of these things. I love the theater. I love the Civic Center.
Yeah, it's fun.
Cool. Well, from that high note, now we're off to new features. So before I dive into the most recent versions, I want to do a quick recap on some things that were like the early 2021 versions that I think are still worth calling out if people aren't regular users of these. The first one would be dynamic parameters. These are really useful in that traditional parameters, when you created them, were a static list and the list did not update. And when you published a workbook with an item selected on the parameter, it did not change. Where this becomes something I use on a regular basis would be like date selections. So I can have a list of dates that the user can select from. That list then automatically updates and rolls forward when a new date is added to the data set, and then it selects the most recent month when they publish that up. You could also do something in which, say, I have a list of teams, and then when somebody loads a report, it's based on a parameter. They switch between different teams, but I can set up logic so that a way it selects the team that user is a member of, so that the report loads filtered to their team or department, but they still have the option to filter and pick through other departments, for example. So that can be really helpful for setting those to load up, but give us the flexibility to change how it selects on load. The other one would be map layers. This one just calling out that we can now put in multiple geographic fields into our maps. In the past, we would use like a dual axis and stop at 2. Now you can do things like have state, county, city name, all of those kind of things available inside of a map, and then a user can toggle those on and off as those layers if they want to see those presented. So they've been around for a year and a half, but not everybody uses them on a regular basis, worth mentioning. And from there, then I'll jump into, I guess, any questions on those before I jump into 2021.3? All right, feel free to drop them in the chat or shout out if you have anything. The next one I'll run through would be, so in 2021.3, so this is picking up where we left off. The change that I think had a lot of questions around it that I was seeing from users was Tableau rolled out something called a personal space. So this is automatically granted to everybody that has a creator or explorer license on your Tableau server. This is an optional feature, so your server admins can go in, and turn that off. So if you have a more recent version and you have a creator license, but you don't see a personal space, that's why the admins turned it off, but it can be turned on and off. The idea is to give you an individual sandbox. So it's a space where you can create and publish up content that nobody else can see. The trade-off is because nobody else can see it, you also can't share access to that. There's no permissions control around it because only you can see it. The exception there is the admins. So server and site admins can see that you have workbooks in your personal space. They, at a high level, can only see the list of like your dashboards. They can't actually load the view of the dashboards in your personal space. Now, if an admin wants to be clever, they can kind of back into things and download things and still look at it if they really wanted to. So it's not entirely private, but their administrators, if they want to see something on the system, they kind of should be able to at the end of the day. The idea behind this space, I would say, is to try and get towards allowing people to use kind of web authoring, and they have a development space before they then move it out into the main area. One thing I'll add in here is if you're using extracts, if you create an extract and publish it up to your personal space, you cannot schedule an extract to refresh from a personal space. It isn't allowed to do that. The only workaround would be if you have an extract that was sitting outside of a personal space, it was scheduled to refresh, and you moved that extract into your own personal space, the schedule would stay with it and it would continue to refresh. That's the only kind of workaround. But the idea being that your personal space extracts would not update on a scheduled basis like they would in our other areas. Again, it's just your own personal sandbox is the idea and use for that. For those of us that have Tableau desktop, I tend to mostly develop my content on my personal machine, and I might save my scrap versions into like a folder on my box drive or something like that. And then when I'm done, I publish up to server. So for many of us, using our personal space would not be part of our current workflow. But I'd see if someone had like an Explorer licenses and we're only using web edit on the server, that might make more use of this. So new feature, it varies from group to group how much they actually make use of this feature and adopt it, but I see it likely being pushed to be used more in the future. The other one that I'm more excited about that came out with 2021.3 would be renaming a published data source. So this sounds like a very mundane, who cares feature. Where this makes really big impact would be if you published up a data source. So you had a server hosted data source and you named it like temporary test, whatever, I don't care. And I then created several workbooks off of that hosted data source. And I publish those up and I'm using those. And later on, I decide like I actually should clean up the name of this hosted data source. The problem is I have all these workbooks pointed at that data source. In the past, you could not rename that data source. What you would have to do is publish up a new one, migrate all of your workbooks over to that new one, and then tear down the old one. Was the process to kind of change the name of the data source it was pointed at, because the mapping was dependent upon the name. What Tableau's done is they've had kind of a data source ID as what the workbooks are mapping to. And so the friendly name that we are then seeing is now separated from the workbook mapping of what it pulls in, so that we can now rename published data sources. A common way that we might use this is that if you're using like a dev test prod process, you would set up a data source, label it like a dev data source or a test data source, create workbooks off of it. And then once everything's in place, it's gone through your vetting process and you're ready to move it on to prod. Now you could just rename that data source to kind of match that and take off like your dev stamp on it that you might have. So in particular, for those moving things through a dev test prod process, being able to rename that data source, or if there's just some internal initiative that we no longer call this, we now rename everything that's this data source to have the new department name. We can now easily update those things without doing a lot of back-end work. So it can save us some effort. The other two, less common, but more fun to know. The sample workbooks can now be customized in our Tableau workspace. And then the other one would be our Slack notifications. And just to pull this up, because not everybody probably knows what I mean by sample workbooks, or what do you mean by that? If you go into your workspace, these dashboards down here along the bottom, those are the sample workbooks. So those are now something in which a company could build their own custom sample workbooks and put them into that bar along the bottom. So for a large organization in which they have sample workbooks that have all of their kind of internal formatting and kind of samples set up, ready to go, that are branded to match their company, they can now put those in there. The process for customizing those sample workbooks is part of the installation process that is done through the command line. So it is not a friendly interface for the average user. It's seen more as like in a large corporate environment in which IT is running a silent install to put this on their machine. They would then add to that script running the install on your machine to then make that sample workbook part of the installation. So it's a little bit behind the scenes to be able to customize that because they're typically seeing this as something like IT folks are managing as part of the installation of this equipment. So not used a whole lot at this point in time, but for some particular clients, that's a really interesting feature that they've made a lot of use out of.
Kent, do you know if that feature is locked to this specific site? So like, I think about client or, people who might have multiple sites. Would they be able to have different, based on where you get your key from, if it's like site management?
I think it's separate from the key and it's part of the install. So like when you install it, it's part of that process. And it would be then agnostic to where you're like, be it you're running a traditional key to validate your install, or you're tied to, forget the name of the server hosted licensing that we now have, that you would then connect to the server. I would not expect, for example, to say like, depending upon which Tableau server I log into or which site I log into, those sample workbooks would dynamically change. I'm not aware of anything around that that would dynamically change those out. It's just when you install it, you set these 3 sample workbooks and they're there until somebody like reinstalls it to write over those. Would be the change process.
Okay, cool.
All right, so on to the next one. So 2021.4. The first one that I'm really excited about, which also falls into the extremely mundane category, is copy and paste. So you're like, we could copy paste text before, who cares? What this is copy and text of text boxes and images. So if you have a text box that is used on one dashboard, be it it's part of your header, it's part of a title, and you need to reuse that in another dashboard, you can now copy and paste that text box again inside of the same workbook or same dashboard or into another dashboard. When you do this copy paste process, it brings the object in as a floating object. So the idea is when it pastes it in, it doesn't know where it should be sitting if you're using a tiled layout. So it defaults to making pasted objects floating. And then you can then drag that in and drop it in where you need it to be. A quick keyboard shortcut, if you're not familiar with it, to make that easier, if you hold the Shift key in Tableau while you're moving an object, it flips it between floating or tiled. So if you have a color legend that is in a tiled layout and you want to make it floating to then put it over something, if you grab that header of that legend and hold the Shift key, it'll flip it over into being a floating object to then place it where you want it. Or the reverse of this, when you're using this copy paste mechanism, Control V, you paste it in, it comes in as floating, you click onto the handle, you hold the Shift key to flip it over to tiled, and then you drop it into your structure where you would want that to go. So it's small, but it does help speed up the development process and makes our lives a little bit easier. So would highly recommend that feature if you have to do a lot of that type of thing. The next one would be editing published data sources. So earlier I talked about we can rename a data source. By editing published data sources, the change is that in the past, once a data source was published, the only things you could really do was edit the connection. And by that, I mean change out the username and password that it runs under. With edit published data sources, this now opens up the web edit menu, and it gives you the same options that you would have locally in Tableau Desktop. So the big use for this would be, say, I have a published data source that's being used in a report. I find there's a new table I need to add to this extract. It's on the server. I could actually on the server there locally hit edit and use either like the relationship model or join and add that table to that. So that'd be easy if it's an addition. But the big one would be if I need to make changes to it. So for example, if you're using Snowflake, you might have published it using one warehouse and you want to change the warehouse that it runs under. I can then edit and adjust that out. Where I am more likely to use this on a regular basis is that I can edit filters. So a clever trick for how you can make use of this ability. So the nightmare scenario is that I have a really large database that I need to make an extract from. And when I run this extract, it takes anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes to generate this extract. When I'm generating this extract, Tableau's locked on my machine, and I'm just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, waiting for my extract to run before I can start development. What we can do now would be that I could apply a data source filter and say only pull in a single day's worth of data, or some way to subset this data down in a way that my extract now runs very quickly. I pull my extract for just a single day, everything's set up the way that I want it. I publish it up to the Tableau server. I then go on the Tableau server, go to edit data source, remove that filter so that it now pulls in the full historical data set, hit save, and it now will then generate that full extract. And so that 20 to 30 minutes that I might have been waiting on my machine, I can now pull it with a subset that's filtered, publish up to the server, remove the filter, rerun the extract on the server as a way to then move that load time and that processing off of my machine so that I'm now kind of able to continue working on what I have locally without having to wait on that. In the past, there were other tricks to do this. I could create like a custom filter and have it based on a timestamp and then like be able to load it locally. We did have some workarounds for things like this in the past, but they were clunky and were harder to kind of pull back out. Now we can just do that directly on the server. So that's one of the main ways I would make use of that. It just makes it easier now to go edit it in place rather than having to download, make changes, regenerate the extract, then publish the extract back up to server if I find that I missed something in my process initially. The next one, map layer improvements. In the past, map layers only worked off of a single source. Now they've made it so that you can actually pull in geographic fields from multiple data sets and drop them into your map to be able to use them on a map. And then the other one here is that they've rolled out what they're calling the Tableau Exchange. The Tableau Exchange consists of kind of two main buckets of things. One is what they're calling accelerators now. And accelerators are just canned dashboards that they've built. So the idea is that I need to create a dashboard to do some financial reporting. They have a pre-built dashboard around that generic topic that you could then go borrow from. So the idea is that they pre-built out and kind of a curated list of dashboards that they think will help others in their development process. The kind of dirty secret with this is that it also assumes a standardized data structure being fed into it. So the customization piece is that it works for the most part, but everyone's data set is going to be a little bit different, even if it's the kind of the same topic. So there's going to be some amount of customization required. It's not completely just plug and play, but it gives you a great starting point, some example dashboards around a particular topic that you could then borrow from and then ideally replace out with your data source and make some changes and hopefully minimal modifications and be able to then reuse that content that's already created. So that's what's called an accelerator. It's just a pre-built dashboard as a sample you can borrow from. And then the other portion of the exchange would be the extensions. So our extensions in Tableau have been around for several years now. The exchange is now just putting a name on top of a centralized place where you can then go to look for Tableau extensions. So the exchange is accelerators, which is pre-built reports, and our extensions are now housed inside of a single web page that they've kind of put a branded name on. So if you see those terms, that's what those mean. Any questions on that piece before I keep going? Just to show it while I've got it, here's an example of a random data source, our new option for edit data source. So what does that look like actually for us? Takes us into web edit. In this case, if I want to edit, I have to put in my password because I'm connecting to the data source. So reaching out to my Snowflake environment, once it authenticates, the idea is that now we can go into our data source editing window, the same as we would see in desktop. And I now would have the ability to come in here and say, add in a new table. If I needed it, I could change out the warehouse that this particular Snowflake instance is running under. I could also do things like come over here and edit the filters and change those out. So this is the portion where I was talking about if I were clever, I could filter this to a single day locally, run my extract, publish it up, come in here, just go into edit filters, remove that filter because I no longer need it, and then publish it back up in this space and rerun that extract to make that change. So very familiar interface, same as what we see on desktop. We just now have available to us in the browser through edit data source. And don't see any new questions, so I'll roll on to the next one then. Get to the navigation system. 2022.2. Not as exciting. Oh, it jumped over. Make sure I'm in my right order. 2022.1. So for this one, the first one, this applies to a subset of folks. For those that are using Tableau, what was formerly known as Tableau Online, which has now been branded as Tableau Cloud. If you're using that as your kind of Tableau server hosting option, in the past, we had limited access to our administrative reporting. So if you had a local instance of Tableau server, underneath that Tableau server was a Postgres database called Workgroups that recorded information around user activity. So I could then go in and see who was using what and load times and all these different things. In Tableau Online, you lost the ability to pull out that information because you didn't have access to that database. At this point in time, Tableau has added in some hosted data sources. The good news is that they've cleaned up those tables and made direct usable data sources. So in a traditional Tableau server, I've got to join together a bunch of different tables, do a lot of work to figure out what report load times look like. On Tableau Online, there's just a single data source that then has all of your load times stored in one place. The idea is that now for those on Tableau Online, they rolled out a new set of dashboards for administrators on a Tableau Online environment. And as well with that, they now have these data sources available to them. So that way you can now create your own custom reports to dig into relevant questions for those administrators. The most common ones would be just documenting like, what's on this, what's being used recently, so I can understand which workbooks have not been used in the last, say, 6 months. And then being able to track load times on those reports would be the kind of main things that we're looking for out of those data sources. So that's now become available for the Tableau Cloud administrators that wasn't there in the past. The next one I think is a little bit marketing-ish, and that it just was called View Acceleration. And if you go into the new features release page, all it just says is that it's a way that you can now make dashboards load up to 100 times faster. So if somebody says, well, hey, do you want your dashboards to run 100 times faster? Everybody's going to just say, well, yeah, why not? So what is it? It is not magic. All it is caching. So as far as I can tell, it's still a bit of a black box. But what this is that normally when a Tableau view is used, the first person to look at that view, it submits a query, it runs, it processes the view, and it loads it. If someone comes after you and goes to look at the exact same dashboard, Tableau will have that dashboard cached in view, and the cache will then load much faster than submitting the initial query. So by caching the dashboard in advance, it can then load it much faster. The kind of dirty secret piece is like, how do you get it to be 100 times faster? You have a really bad dashboard to begin with, is how you get it to be 100 times faster when it's cached. If you're building a really good dashboard to begin with and it loads, in a second or maybe 2 or 3 seconds, the caching might take it from like 3 seconds to 1 second. It's faster. If it was a really bad dashboard that took a minute to load and it now loads in a second because it's cached, like it's X faster, but you've got bigger problems you should probably be solving to begin with. But all this is it's just caching the dashboard in advance so that the first user to look at it gets it to load a little bit faster. So where do I go to turn this on? This is an option now when you go to publish a dashboard. There's a checkbox for turn on view accelerator. And all that does is then cache it. So then the next question is, well, if it makes it faster, why don't I do this on everything everywhere all the time? And it's because caching these results in advance does take up some amount, though it's not huge, but it is adding to our resources on the server if we're then caching these results in advance. So this would be most valuable in cases where you have dashboards in which the user, when they open up the dashboard, it takes a few seconds to load because it's kind of a complex initial load. But once it loads, the user rarely needs to adjust it beyond that. So kind of the initial load covers all of their needs. Then they're going to see a lot more benefit. If it's a dashboard that after I open it and it loads, the first thing that I do is I'm going to go and adjust a bunch of filters to get to what's actually relevant to me. Like I'm still going to wait on that load time. It's just cutting down that initial load time before I can kind of go and edit and get to what I need. So your mileage may vary on how useful this is for an individual case, but in particular, dashboards that have a slow initial load, the view accelerator is helpful because it would then cache those results in advance for us. The next one would be our workbook optimizer. So this is something that now pops up when you're in the process of publishing a dashboard to the Tableau server. Tableau might now pop up with a message saying like, hey, you should consider these things. So the workbook optimizer has a lot of kind of rules of thumb baked into it, that it says like, hey, by the way, you're using 50 sheets on this dashboard. You might get improved performance by reducing the number of sheets on this dashboard. It's not going to tell you that, hey, by the way, you can make your dashboard 30% faster by dropping these two particular sheets. It's not that nuanced. It's just saying, hey, we've got a kind of behind the scenes number in which if you go over this, we're going to call out, and it has kind of a stoplight of like green, yellow, red of just the number of sheets. If you exceed 5 or 6 sheets on a dashboard, you might get a warning saying, hey, seems like you're using a lot of sheets, you might want to reconsider type thing. So that it'll check that around sheet counts, things like blends or LODs, that it's got a variety of different kind of checks baked into the optimizer that it'll just give you a message saying, hey, you might want to consider looking into this particular aspect of your dashboard to try and improve performance. It's not overly prescriptive about what needs to be done. It's just going to say you're above this threshold. This generally leads to reduced performance. You should consider trying to reduce this, number of this particular type of object in this case. So it's a helpful indicator to catch you if you're doing kind of less than ideal things. It's not a magic bullet to explain exactly what you did wrong and tell you exactly what needs to be fixed. The next one here would be the Ask Data phrase builder. So Ask Data has been rolled out now for a couple of years, with the idea being you can now type in a simple question and get a response inside Tableau, a simple summary. They're steadily building out and adding to this feature. With the phrase builder, what it gives you now is kind of a checkbox that you can then check individual fields. So it makes it kind of in between state, of you're not just typing a sentence and hoping Tableau interprets it correctly, but you're also not going into like desktop and building out a view. You instead now have some dialog boxes that you can interact with to select like, hey, I want a quick view, but I want this on rows and this on columns, that you can now do a quick drop down with a couple of drop down boxes. So it's a simplified view builder type object that allows you to kind of clarify what you're asking for and customize that inside the Ask Data window. Ask Data is something that works really well in cases where you have a wide variety of needs, but a very simplistic data source that makes it then work really well. If you have a lot of follow-up questions that go after that, that's when you're going to start getting into things that might go back to a dashboard. But if I just need to know, like, what was sales in the East region last week, like that's something that I could type up as a question and it could handle and then return that result. So if I'm just adjusting basic filters to slice and dice to a number that I need, that's going to do really well. it's that follow-up question of like, why is sales down in this particular subgroup at this particular time? And I want to keep drilling into that question. You're going to start to bump up against an upper limit of what you'd want to be doing in Ask Data versus building a report for. But for those high-level questions, it can do a good job. It's steadily being added to. It's not a feature that I use a ton or I'm super thrilled with at this point in time, but it is steadily progressing and being added onto. So yeah, I'd be curious if anybody is using this on a regular basis or has feedback around it. But these are the ones for this version. If you guys have any questions before I move on. Talking a bunch. That 2022.2 is pretty light for our most recent one here. So data stories, if you were watching about a year and a half ago, Tableau made a purchase of a company based out of the Chicago area. And what they did is that you would feed in a data set and it would write a data story, which is just say a lot of descriptive statistics and kind of sentences that would explain what's going on. And that was kind of a tool that did that. What we're now getting is that it's a widget inside of Tableau Desktop that you can then drop into your dashboard, select some objects and tell it to generate a data story for you. So if what you're trying to add into your dashboard is a complex text box that says like yada, 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 sales were up this percent, yada, 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 sales number was this, yada, 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 sales number, by this, to have that text around those metrics. This is a widget that I think now will help make those types of interactions easier to set up. I haven't used it a lot personally at this point. We're still kind of just getting around to 2022.2 as far as not as many of our clients are onto that one yet. But for in particular text, long form text that you want to be able to explain what's happening and have kind of information around certain high level numbers, I think this will now become more useful for those types of setups where in the past we would just create a text box and do a long calculation and concatenate in some things and try to make some dynamic switches in the text to kind of write out those sentences. It will now allow us to replace that. The next one is interesting in that it is an extension created by Tableau. And it's something that in the past I might have expected to have been a feature inside Tableau Desktop natively, but instead they chose to introduce this as an extension, though it is an extension authored by Tableau. And what this extension does, and here I'll just pull up the Tableau page so I can at least show you some buttons. So I guess one, I'll stop here. Here's the little demo of the data stories. Idea is it's an object now in our dashboarding that we can drop in, select some sheets that we want it to talk to, customize the fields piped in, and then it'll write out this kind of text box. So that's the data stories process. It's a new object inside our dashboarding window. And then if I go on down, so here's our list of features, get to our filter objects. Here they didn't get a fancy picture for us, but just so if you want to see where to get to this. But what it is I can now set up a button on a dashboard so that when a user clicks on that button, I can then have it set so that it adjusts the filters on a given dashboard in a particular way. So this is similar to what we can do now with customized views, in that I can save a customized view of a dashboard with filters set a certain way, but I have to navigate between customized views. Now what I can do is set up a button so that when the user clicks on this button, the filters in that dashboard can then be adjusted in a particular way. So if there's a combination of filters that need to be adjusted in a particular way for different users, I can now preset those filter combinations through this extension and then make that a button available to the user in the dashboard to be able to interact with. So tearing through those, any questions though on what I've covered so far before we bounce on to our next topics? All right, back to my slides. So the next one, I'll group these all together, would be the data management add-on. So there's a series of new features that you might have seen added in, and then you would say, but I don't see those features. Why don't I have those? So the data management add-on is an extension to your Tableau server environment. So it has an additional cost associated with it in addition to what you're paying for regular licensing. Depending upon the number of users, this is basically either a percent basis of your Tableau spend or a fixed price per user in your environment. But it adds in a couple of things. It gives you prep conductors, so you can now schedule prep flows, gives you the Tableau data catalog, which allows you to monitor data sources and track back like how many data sources are tied to which table from my database, questions like that. And then the newest addition here is virtual connections. So virtual connections are kind of the new third category of options added in with data management add-on. And what they allow you to do is that now for an explorer who's on your Tableau server environment, they can now author a new data source. So in the past, if I needed to say create a relationship between a combination of tables to create a data source, I would have to do that in desktop. It also meant that I had to have credentials to that database. What we can do now with virtual connections is that I could have a single service account that we use for all of our data connections to this database. I can go into Tableau server and set up the connection so that we have these 50 tables available from this database. They all run underneath this single service account's credentials. And then I can expose those tables to users. Users can select those tables, create relationships between those tables, and build out new data sources, and then publish them up to the server. But they're all still running underneath that initial service account, and those users do not need to be given the credentials of that service account. And then once they have that, then I can now have, for example, what this is leading us towards is web edit usage, or now web authoring, as they're calling it. The idea being that somebody with an Explorer license could go in here, connect to a data source, pull together the tables they need to use, create the extract that they need, then create a workbook, and do that all while in the Tableau server environment. So kind of the overarching theme of the updates of the last year, year and a half, is Tableau is steadily pushing us towards web authoring becoming a viable option, versus right now, most of us are still going to be creating content using Tableau Desktop locally on our machine and publishing up to the server. Web edit's handy in a pinch, but it's not really where most of us go to do our day-to-day dashboard development. They're steadily building out features to make that something that we could then be entirely browser-based. Point two, they are now owned by Salesforce. Salesforce is kind of cloud first, do everything in the cloud. So we're moving towards that kind of pattern. The other subset of virtual connections is centralized row-level security. And what we can do when we create those tables and we make them available to users is we can build row-level security into those connections by default, so that I can expose a list of tables out to users. Users can select from those tables, build out their own data sources, but I can have row-level security built into those data sources automatically, because I've applied it at this high level inside of my virtual connections environment, so that automatically row-level security is applied. And by row-level security, what I mean is that I might have, say, sales data, and that I want different sales folks to be able to access the data, but each one of those kind of sales reps should only be able to see their data and not be able to see other sales reps' information. I can now set up a data source and be able to build from it. And I, as the developer, would then be able to create out all of this content, but I might only ever see a small subset of the data. And then when I publish out my report, depending upon the user, when they look at the report that I built, they might see a completely different kind of set of records, so that they see kind of their own report with their data that I never was able to access or view during the development process. Right now in desktop, we can still create that type of thing, but it's more in the development stage. We can possibly get around some of that, or that we have to manage that on a per data source basis. We now have the ability to set this up for a suite of data source objects, and that any then reporting created through that list of objects could then have this row level security built into it. So it makes it a little bit easier to manage and to scale, would be the idea with the centralized row level security. I wish this was baked into the default product and not behind the paywall of the data management add-on, but this is kind of how they're covering development costs of some of these new features. And then the last one here would be lenses and revision history are now part of the catalog. So initially the data catalog did not include these objects. So now virtual connections, revision history, and lenses are part of the data catalog. And again, the catalog is just an interface that allows you to track down which data source objects are being used in what way. So I can now say, hey, this table from this database is used in these 10 dashboards, and these worksheets by these 5 authors are making use of it. Is the type of information that it lets us track back into. And then if you guys want to go and learn more, brush up on any of these features, the web page, it's the Tableau Products All Features page. And then you'll see it listed out by version number with the highlights. If you click on the View All Features tab, that will take you then to the drill down page for that particular version number, which is what I was showing earlier with something like this, where you can then see the full list of features for a given version number, where you can drill into the details or the things that I skipped, like talking about the API version 3.1 updates. I gave you the simple highlight version. There's a lot more in each of these versions. Here's where you would go to learn more about those versions. And with that, I'm ready for any other questions we have before we then hand it over to the next thing.
It's a good talk, Kent.
Hope somebody found something useful.
I told everyone my favorite was the copy paste of images and text boxes. This is like when you're doing work on, a workbook that has multiple dashboards that you're like trying to put some of the same language on across all of them. I mean, in reality, what does it save you? Like 4 or 5 clicks? And sometimes those 4 or 5 clicks are like the equivalent of scaling Mount Everest.
I mean, I wish we had it 8 years ago in the tool, but I'm really glad we have it now.
Yeah. Ken, did you have a favorite that you really liked for new features?
Copy paste is up there. The edit data source in particular for that long extract refresh for me, it's a few times in the past where that could have saved me like hours of time that I really wish was out there. But
cool.
Live and learn.
Yeah.
That we can go on to the fun stuff.
Yeah, I think our friend Scott is here to speak to this slide.
Hey, Sean, how are you?
Good. How's it going, Scott?
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to break some news here, but I'll let you go first about getting everyone back in person again.
Yeah, that's true. So in a wild turn of events, I was introduced to, I think also on the call is Danielle, and we've decided to collaborate on our first in-person event. I'm kind of excited to see everyone in person for the first time and try this out. So September 29th, we're all going to get together and Scott is going to present for us. Scott, can you tell us more about what you'll be presenting on?
Yeah, no, we're excited. Hey, I am not the Danny, who you mentioned earlier, and Chris Hagner, who I think are both on this call. There are Tableau experts in the nitty gritty on what you guys do and do very well and successfully, everyone on this call. But what I'm going to try and do is present more from an executive level opportunity because I think it's important that you kind of get outside of the details and really try and explain how effective it is to have these visualizations and all this in the boardroom. And so I'm trying to stuff that before Chris and Danny really started working within Tableau and creating and telling stories with visualizations. It would take, certainly a long time, minutes, if not hours in some ways, to tell the stories in our boardroom to our our chairman, our owner, and or president in other departments. And by kind of infusing ourselves into Tableau over the last few years, I've been able to take, literally something that would have taken forever if anyone truly were to go through a spreadsheet to try and understand something, to literally them getting and understanding that within seconds. And so we want to kind of reverse engineer this and explain from the boardroom how helpful the work that you guys do and how meaningful it is to the executives that get to do analysis and everything off of that. So we're looking forward to that.
Awesome. Thank you,
Yeah,
Scott.
and Sean, I will add, so I'm Danny that he was talking about, but we'll also go through a little bit, Chris and myself, on like just the journey of the Thunder BI. So we'll show some cool dashboards, whether that's arena dashboards that dig down to the seat level. It could be book bus tours. It could be a lot of different things, but we're going to have some fun, show you guys some fun dashboards as well. And just kind of talk through, if you guys have been in BI for a long time, we went from, 1 or 2 people doing Excel graphs in Excel to a team of 4 doing Tableaus and those going, like he said, up to the boardroom. So kind of talk through all of that and the journey that we've had with Tableau, and then do some fun giveaways and food and arena tour. So we're just excited to have everybody back in person and meet you all, and bring the team, everybody that touches Tableau, whether that's your boss down to somebody that's brand new, only been there a couple days. We'd love to have you guys out.
Yeah, that's the thing that we're excited about. Outside just the people on the call here, we'd like for you to invite anyone else, as Danny said, that might be on your team, but also any C-level people that would be interested in coming to the arena. And what we're going to do is we're going to feed you. We're going to give you some drinks. We're going to create a little bit of a program for you. There may be a surprise or two, but then we also want to be able to give you kind of behind the scenes arena tour in places that you may not normally get to see, or any fans actually get to see in the back of house, and just give you a little bit of a Thunder story. Hopefully I'll be in a better mood by then. Today we were hit with some tough news that our number 2 pick in the draft, Chet Holmgren, is going to be out for the whole season. So that's a bummer.
Oof.
I'm sure my tears will stop well before September 29th, but for one day or so, we're gonna be a little miserable, but we're excited to welcome you guys. And we really want to, now next season, we're going to kind of be going into the season for the first time in 3 years, basically, unencumbered, without restrictions and all of that. So we're opening back up without any safety protocols, and we want to do stuff like we're doing with you and invite people back into the arena, and look forward to getting that back started up.
I'm excited. This is gonna be great.
Well, if you guys, again, think about who might enjoy coming out and taking a tour and having some free food and drink, and we'd love to have some of your executives within your companies as well, and we look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Scott and Danielle. And with that, I think our meeting for this month is concluded. And yeah, I'll be sending out more information. I'm going to create an official event page, but like Scott said, this is open invite to anyone you may know. So if you go and register for the event, that'd be great. Gives us an idea for head counts out the gates, but of course, bring everyone you know.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, we'll catch you next month.
Thanks.
This is the part that goes on YouTube at the very end that no one will watch. Just my eyebrows. I can see you guys.